Hi, everybody. This is Michael Kollo. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about today around what I believe to be the future of AI-generated content, especially language content, as it pertains to different kind of business activities and what can be done. I think this class of technologies that we've seen released very, very recently, as near as last week, really marks a massive shift in the landscape for what AI capabilities are able to bring to businesses across the entire spectrum, I would say, and how close we are really getting to these systems, be able to generate original sounding content that's indistinguishable from human content, and how this will kind of superpower and supercharge lots of different industries in different ways. So this is a quick presentation just to show you some of the broad capabilities of what it's able to do. So really what I'd like to do is start a little bit by talking about what GPT is. So throughout this whole presentation, I'm actually talking to a piece of software called ChapGPT. So ChapGPT is developed by OpenAI. I asked about how it is created, and it kind of tells me a little bit about itself. It says, look, I'm an algorithm and I've got some parameters and I've been trained on lots and lots of texts to be able to produce different kinds of responses. So therefore, this is who I am. When I kind of push it on a little bit more and say, hey, listen, can you tell me some more detail? Describe the neural networks that power you, for example. So a little bit more technical detail. It then refers back to an earlier part of our conversation. And it says, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use artificial intelligence and neural networks. And this is what a neural network is, but it's not really going to give me any more information. But what I've learned about it here is that it's able to do a little bit of following up as well. It has a little bit of memory to it, which is pretty incredible. Normally, chatbots are very kind of responsive to single requests. This one has a bit more capability. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So we then go into starting to use it and look at it for different types of applications. ChatGPT and Playground are both products that are created by an organization called OpenAI and Elon Musk AI company. Playground is a slightly earlier version. ChatGPT is very, very new. So a lot of this presentation is about comparing the two things together and trying to understand differences. But I was interested in, for example, creating basic marketing type content. So if I ask, for example, each of these systems to generate for me a quick bit of clever SMS, targeting young people to encourage them to visit, for example, a dentist before Christmas, please make it fun and use emojis. You can see the responses here. You can see that ChatGPT is a lot more comprehensive. It's making little jokes. It's talking about your smile shining bright. It's talking about you not worrying about eating treats with cavities. Don't be a scaredy cat. Make the dentist appointment today. It's playing off the fact that children tend to have fear of dentists. Pretty sophisticated, pretty integrated, completely autonomous. On the right-hand side, it's a little bit more straightforward and direct, more transactional. Come and see the dentist because of a sparkling smile. So you can start to see that the left-hand side has a lot more layers of complexity embedded. If we go back to the Playground, which is a slightly easier version or kind of a more straightforward version, we can ask it to do many other things. I can ask it to generate a piece of information that tells a patient to do something. For example, please ask them to come in to see a doctor, or tell them that everything's fine, or tell them that we want to cancel an appointment and make another appointment, or the fact that a particular doctor wants to catch up with you. And each of these responses to these are done with a little bit of emoji or without emoji. It can be done in different kinds of tones, from formal to informal and so on. The ChatGPT, for example, if you ask it a similar type of transactional response, it will kind of give you an idea of how to frame it. For example, to please, cancel an appointment at, let's say, 3 o'clock and reschedule for 3:30. I would say there's a little bit more color here than what we've seen before, but again, these are more kind of transactional elements. As we start to go a little bit deeper into this, let's say, for example, we want to talk to a client and we have a client list. In this case, Jenny, who we know something about her. She's an older lady. We want to wish her a Merry Christmas. We want to make sure it's personalized. We want to be warm and friendly. It then does this for us. And it's able to write a pretty nice little message that can be emailed or sent to this person through various means, and has a nice framing and nice phrases and sounds very empathetic. We can also get it to write a message to someone else, Robert, who's a young man, and wish them a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, use emoji, and you can start to see that the language starts to change a little bit. Have an awesome holiday season as an example. New Year gives you all good things, again, positive, and we see the emojis there as well, looking a bit funkier and cooler. Write an SMS to a customer, Robert, who we haven't heard from in a while, for example, to reactivate customers and wish him a happy birthday. Mentioned that we bought a bicycle 2 years ago. So this is where we have a customer list and we know something about their buying habits. For example, that they bought something in the past, be funny, entertaining. So the text message is created here, or the message is created here, which actually refers to bicycles as trusty steeds, which is an interesting way. Slang for this refers to that fact that it's bought 2 years ago. Maybe it's time for a tune-up or even an upgrade. You can start to see that it's being interesting and playful, and it's trying to get through the intention of seeing the customer again. And it's interesting that it read into this the idea that we haven't heard from in a while, and that infers that we want to hear from them again. And so the message is kind of constructed with that idea in mind. Write a message that highlights the sale of 20% off car parts and lecture user compelling language, be convincing, and use emojis. So the algorithm goes away and thinks about this and comes back with, in this case, a little bit more lecture alerts, a little bit more salesy, attention to all car enthusiasts. We're having a sale. There's a chance to save on best quality parts. Don't miss out on an amazing opportunity. And there's some friendly emoji at the end of this. So kind of, pretty conservative, but pretty straightforward type of language and output. So what will this mean from not necessarily from a marketing perspective, but from a social media content generation and engagement kind of content? So this is an area, obviously, social media sees a lot of bots and automation already. And we see that in Twitter recently, but we also see it across the board, I would say, in a whole bunch of different forums and different ways as well, looking for clips and pass-throughs and so on. As an example case, we can ask Playground again to write me a Twitter message to promote Bitcoin going to $100,000, use slang, make it fun, use emoji, make it exciting. So you can start to see Bitcoin is kind of on fire. It's up to $100,000. Get in while the getting's good. HODL, which is a slang term, which is hold on for dear life, that people in crypto tend to use to say you have to hold on to it and then wait until it gets to $100,000. So it's used slang, which is we asked it to do. It's used emoji. It's talked about $100,000. I wanted to write a Twitter message that talks to a new kind of car, in this case, a Toyota Model Z5. And I'm blown away. This game is a car changer. Again, a slightly more sales, attention-seeking type of post, looking for something else. So you can imagine just a whole variety of different kind of attention-grabbing posts being AI-generated that sound and feel very convincing. I think authenticity in social media is going to come under enormous amount of pressure as a result of this technology, and we're going to see some social media banning the use of algorithms altogether or trying to snoop for them and then trying to ban them in order to keep that human element, that human authenticity element. And while I'm sure there will be some pushback, but this kind of technology makes it almost impossible to actually observe whether the content is created by people or not by people. Customer service. So customer service primarily is around answering questions for customers where they don't know something about a product or a service, but it can also be an apologizing, it can also be about relating, empathizing, and so on. In this particular case, I've asked the algorithm to write an apology to someone who feels that they've been sent a message in error, for example, and who's upset now. So they took an offense from receiving an SMS, could have been from a phone call, from anything at all, really. And there you can see the letter is written. I'm so sorry if you received this from us. I can imagine how confused. It's trying to show empathy. The message is trying to kind of relate to the person. Please know that I've never intended to send you a message. I am truly sorry. These are individual, personalized, as if it was a person writing to you. Again, to be careful here, because this is where the algorithm starts to be, and I'll talk about this a bit later, a little bit misleading potentially, that it is suggesting that it's coming from an individual and a person. That's why I think the algorithm here is not designed to be used autonomously, but rather was designed as a helper for individuals to scale what they do already to much greater numbers. Tell a customer whose name is Michael that their car is ready to pick up, but that their tires needed to be replaced. It'll cost $500. Be funny and interesting. So this is another interesting example where the message is, hey, good news, your car is ready. Bad news, we had to replace your tires. It's framing the $500 cost as bad news. It's also framing it as in, it's all taken care of, but it's gonna cost you $500. So it's a slangy kind of term. And this is the price of having nice things. Ha ha, see you soon. So it's probably taking some liberties here in terms of the tone that it's taking with this particular customer. And so this is what an interesting point is, how to write prompts in such a way that it doesn't take a particular tone or doesn't make things language-based, perhaps formalizes things, especially for purchases like these. Teaching and education, enormous capability here to be expanded into creating teaching and content material, simply because it's able to write simple explanations of things for very elaborate things. So I'm going to start with the most contention part, which is financial advice. So financial advice is one of those protected areas of basic education. We're very careful who we allow financial advice to be given by. We have regulations, oversight, and so on, because we've seen it being abused in the past. But when it comes to general education as to what diversification means, how one should think about investing and so on, there's plenty of resources around books and various things out there about this kind of stuff. If I ask the algorithm to write me a little bit of financial advice, I'm a 65-year-old woman, 50-year-old woman, and I want to retire at 65 years of age, it will do so. It will tell me about being diversified. It will tell me about having different kinds of assets. It will tell me about this thing called a target date fund, which means that it will try to manage my investments with that notion of retiring at 65. And then it will advise that I go see a special financial advisor. All very sensible things, all very thoughtful, carefully articulated ideas, all things that we can imagine being written and being sent out. Let's say I go a little bit more technical and I ask the question of what is a JavaScript library, which is a form of programming language, should I use if I want to write an app for an iPhone? So here, there's an interesting point. It doesn't actually answer the question very directly. It actually directs me to using a very different kind of tool to write those, such as Xcode or iOS SDK. And it actually doesn't quite answer my question. It pushes me into doing something different. And that's an interesting point, because it is actually giving me advice. It's giving me Apple's advice, to be fair, not its advice, but it's giving me a particular direction of travel, which again is determined by that type of response. This is where things start to get kind of crazy. As well as human language or English language in this particular case, it's also able to generate code and coding language. If I would like it to write a piece of Python code that scrapes information about the weather, it's able to give me with code and with different subtext a piece of code that allows me to read from the internet. Now, not all of these ones can be used or are runnable, I suppose, but many of them provide simple and easy to deploy code sections, and as well as review of code, checking of code, and so on. So in terms of the no-code movement, which is an area of programming or creating apps without writing code, this certainly pushes that agenda very, very strongly along, since a lot of code now can be well written through this kind of algorithm. You might ask, how did it manage to learn this? Well, there are repositories called GitHub and many others online, which allow these algorithms to observe how code is written about various topics, and is able to basically, much like human text, implore that and bring that in. So it's able to translate from human text into coding. And so long as the coding function, I think, is relatively straightforward or has been done before in different ways, it's able to essentially bring that forward and actually write it with accuracy. As you can already see, and I'm certainly wowed by this, I'm sure you are as well, there's areas for danger and misleading. But before I go to this section, I think it's very important to acknowledge that no matter what we think about the dangers or the misleading potential of this technology, the technology is here to stay. The direction of travel for language-based kind of algorithms like the ones you see are only going to become more expensive. They're going to become more sophisticated. They're going to become better as GPT-4 will be released, and then eventually 5 and so on. And there will be other versions that do certain things very, very well. We've already seen something similar in visuals, for example, with picture generation. We're going to see that increasingly with text as well. So, for example, I can ask it to write me a recipe. Just as it did marketing or text messaging or apologies, I can ask it to write a recipe that involves tomatoes, figs, sardines, and rice. It will do that. It will do that without really thinking much about it. And as you can see, it will look like a recipe, sound like a recipe, and I will end up with a sardine and fig rice dish. Now, it has nothing to do with whether that's a dish that exists or is any good, or how it tastes, or whether it's ever been eaten by a human being before, but it will give it a good shot. And so while I haven't really prepared this particular example, it does make me think that it would simply go ahead and execute on what you ask. There are a lot of good safeguards in the algorithm already. If I ask it to help me to extract certain chemical components from plants that could be misused, for example, for drugs or other illegal activities, it will stop me and it will say you shouldn't do that. If I ask it to help me understand how I can print weaponry or 3D guns or engage in illegal activity, it will stop me and it will say I shouldn't do that. So these safeguards already exist within the algorithm. I'm not able to elicit anything from the algorithm that isn't legal, if it's recognized to be illegal especially, but I am able to elicit it to give me things that are maybe nonsensical or kind of, just not reasonable. This is an interesting gray area. So when it comes to scams and online scamming, this is where we start to see an interesting area. If you remember a number of years ago, for many, many years, people used to receive emails from various different supposed celebrities and princes and people in position of power in emerging markets that were looking for someone to help them set up bank accounts. These were obviously fakes and scams, and people who bought into these ended up losing money. Now, many times that these scams were discovered because the emails and the written communication were poor, they were not written grammatically correctly or with the correct English, and because it didn't feel very good. If I ask the algorithm to write me an email, for example, that I can send to somebody claiming that I'm a Nigerian prince and I need to move my money to move to a UK-based account and I need help, it will do so for me. It won't question my motives. It won't question why I should be doing this or how I should be doing this. It did, however, in this particular case, if you note, highlighted in red, which said this could be a problem for our policies, but we haven't quite figured this out yet. And this is an interesting gray area. It may well be that I am a Nigerian prince and I do need something written for me. And so the algorithm is not able to ascertain my intentions. And while I may be able to use it for misleading purposes, it itself is not able to tell that, especially if the underlying activity that I'm doing is not in itself illegal, aka asking for help from somebody else using a particular letter format. So I think it's useful to understand that in terms of scams and written content that elicits information from other people, again, this will be something that boosts the capabilities of these types of systems and adversaries. And we should expect to see more elaborate algorithms and vice versa. We should see more elaborate countermeasures coming to market trying to combat it as well. As we can see, these are huge, huge changes across a wide variety of industries. I've covered a very short amount of them here. I've skipped around between marketing, between customer service, between education and teaching, a little bit into financial services, but a little bit into technology as well as scams and other areas. As we draw 2022 to a close, this has certainly caused enormous sensation. We've had millions and millions of people trying out, signing up for the system all over the world, and OpenAI service had to actually be upgraded to be able to handle the amount of traffic that's coming through. 2023 will absolutely see the year where these technologies proliferate and move into accepted forms of communication, accepted responses, accepted ways of creating content and receiving content and summarizing and producing content and so on. The ramifications are enormous. They're global. They're enormously scalable, and they will spawn entire industries that do not exist today around how to use and deploy these algorithms, which you already start to see in the US, specifically with image generation. As an example, this image was generated with Mid-Journey. It was generated through 2 sentences that were fed into an algorithm, and out came a beautifully sculpted, in this case, sculpted picture that is appropriate for Christmas, that has never been touched by a human drawing hand or an artist or anything like that, completely generated from the ground up by an algorithm. This is a world where content and synthetic content is mainstream, and the companies and the industries that can embrace it and use it to great efficiencies will certainly benefit in the years to come. Thank you so much for listening.